Hello everyone, RORSCHACH is here, and welcome, yet again, to look at what I found. Found footage is a tricky style to adopt. In addition to the normal logistics of story, characters, motivation, and effects, there's also the matter of how to shoot, edit, and present the footage in such a way it suspends your disbelief. A lot of people criticize found footage for being obviously not real. I think that criticism is a bit unfair because it demands more than any movie can deliver. Found footage to me isn't about perpetrating a scam, it's about giving an impression. It's about immersing the audience in the events by presenting them as if they were real. You wouldn't say Poltergeist is a bad movie just because it's faked. And by the same token, I don't think Grave Encounters is a bad movie just because it's faked. Mind you, both of these movies show very extreme hauntings, more extreme than any haunting that has been reported in recent memory. So, as far as believability goes, you could argue that's a mark against the one portraying itself as a real haunting, but come on, you gotta be flexible when it comes to these things. I mean, have you seen those real hauntings on Nuke's Top 5 or Slapped Ham? A chair moves across the floor, or a painting falls down, and that's a terrifying haunting. I mean, can you imagine how boring it'd be if someone made a whole movie? Oh, someone has. And it's the scariest film online. Says so right there. Well, that's all the invitation I need. RORSCHACH is the creation of Chad Smith, a little-known but talented movie director, and tells the story of two paranormal researchers examining a mother's claims her house is haunted. Hardly a groundbreaking premise, but while similar movies have their characters quickly descend into nightmares beyond their imagining, RORSCHACH is a subtler take on the concept that works to instill a very genuine feeling of dread in the audience, with slow panning shots, characters talking, and things moving by themselves. And I should mention at this point that this movie, it obviously has nothing to do with Watchmen, but I am not entirely sure what the title of the movie refers to. If I were to guess, it refers to how the movie is vague enough to be interpreted. Not as far as plot or character is concerned, but put it like this, I could recreate some of the effects in this movie, but if equal things were to happen to you in real life, it would be convincing enough for you to believe it could actually be a ghost. So I think the title refers to that, but yeah, I'm not sure. So let's take a look at RORSCHACH and see if at the very least I can figure out whether or not it's a good movie. Okay, so we are definitely watching a found footage film, got it. This kind of opening has been done to death. You see it in nearly every found footage film. But I think if it had been a more cinematic opening, it'd annoy me more. The disclaimer opening, as I call it, even though it doesn't necessarily disclaim anything, only works when the footage isn't presented as completely unaltered. What I mean by that is, take a documentary-style found footage film, for example. Even if the narrative is the footage was discovered after the events, it would have gone through someone who looked the footage over, edited it, cherry-picked the most relevant parts, and reassembled it into a cohesive narrative. That makes sense. If, however, someone, I don't know, found a hi-8 tape in the forest, and they put it online without doing anything to it, or put it on a DVD and distributed it without changing anything about it, and you expect me to believe, yeah, that's not good. With that said, I think it works in this case because the film is presented as a documentary-style footage, while not documentary in the sense that it was obviously meant to be viewed by other people, but documentary in the sense that it was documenting the events but the researchers were documenting the events that the film shows, and then it was reassembled to be distributed to... What the hell am I talking about? Yes, documentary-style footage. That was collected, edited, and condensed into the movie that now sits before us. So, yeah, I think it works. Setting the mood for the rest of the film, the disclaimer is overlaid with a video clip of a hall with what sounds like a kitchen drawer being rummaged through in the background, and then it tries to deafen you! Ugh! Chad, it's a bit early for loud jump scares, don't you think? The corridor fades to New York City, and our two investigators for this little excursion, Ricky and Ross, played by Ricky Lee Barnes and Ross Compton. On that note, why is it tradition among found footage films to have the characters named after the actors? I mean, I know most of the time the actors ad-lib their lines to make the conversation, well, flow more natural, but is it really that difficult to remember a different name? Especially when the names aren't mentioned a lot of the time. This pleasant drive takes us far from the crowds of modern life to the more isolated and spooky sticks, and through conversation establishes Rick and Ross as investigators of the paranormal. At the end of the journey we meet up with Jamie and Ashlyn, played by Jamie Gillespie and Ashlyn Allen, who says there are weird things happening in their house.
Well, it first started with tapping and knocking sounds, doors open that we knew that we had closed.
You mean in a house with a kid? There are noises and doors sometimes don't remain closed? Wow! Which is actually the point, I think. See, if those things happen by themselves, it's spooky, but at the same time it has a natural explanation, so yeah, I think it's a good lead-in to the movie. Also, I like the dialogue and acting here. It feels natural, like an actual conversation people might have.
That Ashlyn was messing with me or sleepwalking even, because I used to do that as a kid.
So did I.
Really?
Yeah.
I really don't like the editing done in this scene. Every now and again there is a time skip, and it's done with a crossfade from one point in time to another. On the one hand, it condenses what could be a very long conversation into its bullet points, keeping focus on what's important to the story, conveying what Jamie and her daughter are going through without any unnecessary fluff that interrupts the flow of the movie. But, I don't know, to me it just looks really odd. And I can't help but feeling like we're missing out on something. Not to mention, Ricky and Ross, despite their occupation, are depicted as skeptics and devoted to empirical evidence. And I can't help but feel people like that, they would do everything in their power to make sure their documentation isn't staged or that they're not cherry-picking data. So why would they edit their footage in such a way to make people question whether that could be a possibility? Jamie goes on to tell them how she sometimes heard a voice in her bedroom, and disgusting smells would come and go. Something would enter Ashlyn's room at night, and finally she shows them a video where the front door would swing open and close by itself. Ross explains that they won't actually be able to help her make the activity stop, but only investigate the house and potentially record some of the events Jamie describes, possibly even disprove them and provide a natural explanation for them. After this, they take a tour of the house and become introduced to Ashlyn's doll, Patrick.
So we actually found Patrick in the garage when we moved in, and obviously she wanted to keep him. I was going to throw him in the dumpster.
A creepy doll in a horror movie. Yeah. I do believe this film is haunted by the ghost of dead originality. They also established the alarm Jamie installed when the doors began opening by themselves, and Ross and Ricky get to experience something creepy themselves when they start hearing scratching from inside the walls. Still, they're not entirely convinced, but will lend Jamie a video camera to leave running all the time if something strange does happen, so they can hopefully capture it and gain some proof of supernatural activity.
There is something happening in this house. There is.
A bit more than a week later, the camera does capture something. Picture frames begin falling down from a cupboard, and it scares Jamie enough to send her running out of the room. Not entirely unhumorous. Ricky and Ross don't find anything off with the cupboard or the picture frames, or at least nothing that would offer a natural explanation for why they'd fall down, but it inspires them to become more active in the investigation. They set up more cameras, interview a neighbor about the property, and spend more time with the family, getting to know them more personally than a clinical investigation would allow. Which I think kind of defeats the point of their investigation. If you become personally involved in an investigation, you're no longer objective, and that could put your whole credibility at stake. Although, they're researching ghosts, so how much credibility could they have? Not to mention it makes them more empathetic towards Jamie and Ashlyn. And their presence would make their investigation easier. Over the following days, the strange events start to intensify. Ashlyn is awoken by a strange sound coming from her grandmother's room, and Ross starts finding small rocks spread around the house. Something interesting about the haunting in this movie, it appears more inspired by real-life reports of hauntings than any horror story or horror movie that I know of. For example, Poltergeist can supposedly manifest stones out of thin air. And so the presence of stones may suggest poltergeist activity. I'm impressed! Most horror movies don't make that effort. For a while, Ross and Ricky don't find any conclusive proof of paranormal activity. While the house is creepy and some strange things appear to happen, there are also many natural explanations for them, and they begin contemplating if maybe Jamie is reading more into it than there is to it. Jamie has the feeling the presence doesn't want to do anything when the cameras are on, but mentions more and more things have disappeared only to reappear somewhere different. So they set up a law. Well, that's horrifying if it's not Jamie or Ashlyn doing it. They don't seem to believe Jamie is trying to deceive them. She seems genuinely distraught over the events in her house. But without an explanation and without answers, they're still not entirely convinced. On cue, a broom falls over, and something starts knocking from somewhere in the house.
I don't like this.
It's okay. Can you tell where it's coming from? No, it's too close.
I like this scene. I think the whole movie has been condensed into its essences in this one scene. Everything you need to know about Rorschach can be found in this scene. It starts out entirely normal. All the characters, they're gathered around the kitchen table, having pleasant conversation. They're talking about the problems, but only in terms of theoretics, not as an actual thing. When something does happen, it's immediately tense and solemn. An unknown presence that they can't see or touch is somewhere in the house against their will. And you're on the edge of your seat, waiting to see what happens next. Ashlyn and Jamie, they hug each other tight in fear. Ricky and Ross are listening intently. It's entirely calm, but the air is electric with tension. And nothing happens. Pooh. Nevertheless, it's not enough to convince them. It's not proof something supernatural is happening, and they need to bring in someone to examine the house and make sure it can't be explained by creaky pipes, the house settling, or maybe even some small animals living in the walls. So they bring in a handyman to come and take a look at the house, only to have him run out in terror and only say this about what happened.
What?
Figuring he's talking about the doll, they examine Patrick some more, and only affirm how creepy the doll looks. It has no voice box or mechanism that could make a noise, no internal engines or batteries. It's just a lifeless doll. The days go by and nothing obvious happens, but they discover the fridge has become dented somehow, like it had been punched with a hammer. Then it starts up again, on October 11th. While sitting around the kitchen table, a bad odor wafts through the house, and the knocking starts again. It circles them outside the walls, before leading them to the garage door. And the lock is moving. Opening the door, they find the garage is empty. Searching it, there's no one there. but closing the door behind them, the lock keeps moving. Another detail I'm not sure anyone else picked up on, the door outside looks exactly like the door from The Hands Resist Him. It's a subtle detail that me at least has found all the more unnerving, but then again, how much more unnerved can you be when you're already peering into the pitch black night while an invisible entity is trying out the locks to your house? The haunting is getting a bit too intense now, so the movie slows down while Ricky and Ross try and find an explanation for the haunting, but they end up finding nothing of use. So the day goes on with Ricky playing with Ashlyn, and one of the neighbors mentions seeing someone moving around Ashlyn's room while she was sleeping, scaring Jamie even more. 5 days later, the vestibule camera catches something. Patrick has been placed on a chair in the kitchen, and he's moving. One of his arms gradually bend down towards his legs, before becoming still again. Strange noises can be heard from the kitchen, and a vague, barely visible outline moves from the living room into the kitchen. Up until this point, the movie has relied entirely on practical effects, things that you can do with a bit of string and some speakers. As a result, it's come across as much more physical and much more real than it would have if you had just drowned it in a sea of post-production. This, I think, is the only bit of CG in the film, and it looks damn good. Obvious enough to be noticed, obscure enough to be discarded, and otherworldly enough to be strange. Ricky, knowing neither he nor Ross edited the footage, and Jamie and Ashlyn don't know how to do that, is beginning to consider the possibility that they may be dealing with a real ghost. Ross, meanwhile, is too stunned to even comment, but they nevertheless roll with it and suggest to Jamie they set up an impromptu lab to study the phenomenon objectively inside the house. Mind you, when they say lab, they mean a motion-activated lamp. Okay. They're working under the stone tape theory, which is one of the many explanations for ghosts. It basically suggests that ghosts are projections of events and people that have somehow been imprinted into the fabric of reality and may be displayed under certain circumstances, like a recording. If that's the case, then the next time the ghost is manifested, it should perform the exact same movements as in their video, and that ought to trigger the lamp. Or at least I think that's what they were going for. They don't explain it very well, and if they were gonna go for something else, they don't get the chance to see that through. Jamie lets Ricky and Ross stay overnight in case something else happens, and they wake up to strange noises coming from upstairs. Investigating, they find nothing. Both Jamie and Ashlyn's rooms are locked, and everything has gone quiet again, but when they make their way downstairs, they hear someone moving around down there. With a brave foot forwards, they go down, and no one is there. But the back door is open. It's never occurred to me before, but there is something inherently threatening about a locked door coming open. They examine the backyard and surrounding area, but no one appears to have come in or left. And when showing Jamie the video in the morning, it's more than she can handle.
There's nobody else with a key to the house.
No, there's nobody.
And you changed the locks. When you moved in, you changed the locks, right?
Going back to the stone tape theory, a key part of the stone tape theory is that ghosts aren't, for lack of a better word, living beings. They're recordings, like magnetic resonance on a plastic strip, without any free will or unpredictability. This ghost has proven erratic, and it has displayed intent. It clearly thinks and acts by itself, even if the intent isn't entirely clear. These guys have no idea what they're doing! The threatening actions don't stop there, as the neighbor from before comes by to be interviewed about a strange interaction she had over the phone. When calling the house, a little girl picked up, and when the neighbor asked if she had called the house, the little girl answered, "They don't live here anymore," before giggling and hanging up. Days later, they're all woken up by the door alarm in Jamie's bedroom. Jamie is standing outside, terrified because her bathroom light is on, but she didn't turn it on. It doesn't seem very horrifying, except there is someone standing behind the fucking door! Oh, wait, no there isn't. Well, that's embarrassing. I just ruined one of the best scares in the movie. Sorry? Well, according to the movie, it was apropos with some levity right there. The next day, Jamie has accrued some bruises on her arm and leg, after an unfortunate fall down the stairs when she stumbled over Patrick. What happens next is exactly what you think will happen. But the build-up is so excellently done, it still gets you when it does happen. The guy enters the room while flicking the camera back and forth towards the doll. You know where this is going.
I want that thing out of my house tonight.
Alright.
Right now.
Okay.
Aside from a literal bump in the trunk, the removal operation is carried out without a hitch, but it has Ross curious where exactly the doll came from. Turns out it came from an old trunk Jamie found left in the house when she moved in, and instead of throwing it away, she decided to gift it to her daughter. I'm not sure whether to hold that against her. On the one hand, horror movie stupidity. On the other, this movie hasn't exactly followed the rules of classic cheesy horror, so are those rules really applicable here? Learning nothing, except the trunk seems to be filled with the miscellaneous stuff the former owners didn't know where else to put, Jamie, Ross and Ricky decide to pour themselves some wine and talk about the things that scare them.
I guess I've always been afraid of the same things that interest me. You know, the things that are unknown, the things you can't know.
I would criticize this, but speaking from experience, I know misery tends to breed an interest in the horrific and the macabre. It's a way of, when things go so far that you can't live in denial anymore, accepting it and embracing it is a way to take back control and grow as a person by adapting. Still kind of weird conversation considering the circumstance. They get something else to talk about when the ghost discovers the doll is gone and begins howling its misery through the air ducts.
Could that be a furnace filter? You know what the home inspector said about furnace filters?
That sounds like a voice.
Actually, I think it sounds like a sheep. Or possibly a baby. Baby sheep. Someone must have bred with a sheep and birthed an abomination towards God and humanity, and shamed by their actions, they buried it in the soil, and now its lost spirit is haunting the house! That would actually be a fucking cool horror movie. And in the next scene, Ashlyn has gotten sick, and Jamie has reached the edge of what she can handle this house throwing at her. There's actually nothing to suggest that it's the house making Ashlyn sick, but buying the house, even at a low price, dented Jamie's economy something fierce, and she is still paying bills, trying to make it work, so she's putting all of her effort into sustaining a house that for all intents and purposes is only making her and her daughter miserable, with nothing to show for it, and unable to escape. I'd be breaking down too.
See. What is that?
Is that?
Oh!
It is! It's ectoplasm! God, I haven't seen ectoplasm in a ghost movie since I was a kid! Okay, I'm sorry I interrupted. Ashlyn is crying in her bed, and her door has been violently smashed from the inside. It seems the ghost has finally had enough of the family, and flares up spectacularly. Fleeing from the house, they all drive away, unsure of what to do now, but finding Ashlyn has bruises all over her body, Jamie has finally had enough.
We can't stay in that house. We can't stay in that house.
Okay, no.
Just one more thing. Reviewing some of the footage Ashlyn recorded, Ricky and Ross discovered something they didn't see before. It seems, for whatever reason, the ghost was following Ashlyn. The movie ends with a tell don't show, and informs us the house remains empty, but later Jamie and Ashlyn reached out to Ricky and Ross again, because they were worried things had started happening in their new place. So, is this the scariest movie online? No, it isn't. But it's a damn good attempt to be. It's easy to go overboard when making a ghost movie with the belief that spectacle makes for a grand impression. If you do a bit of research and watch some supposedly real hauntings caught on video, the supernatural events are usually much smaller, sometimes barely noticeable if not for the camera. The reason they're horrifying is they're strange enough to offer the possibility of a break in rational reality, but small enough to be dismissed and ignored in a more cynical evaluation. Basically, too grand a spectacle becomes too unbelievable. This movie is aware of roughly what we are willing to accept as possible in terms of a real-life haunting, and works within those limitations without being hamstrung by them. Starting slow, the happenings aren't really scary, aside from their unexplainability, but gradually they build to become all the more threatening. It doesn't get physical until the very end, and I applaud that. An unknown presence in your home is unnerving on its own, but having it gradually become a threat to you and your family is terrifying. The real conviction doesn't come from the events themselves, but how the characters react to them. Jamie Gillespie delivered a brilliant performance as the concerned mother of Ashlyn. I could feel how her nerves slowly frayed over time as the events became increasingly distressing, and it made the still moments all the more tense with a real sense of danger to the characters. In extension, Ricky and Ross reacting to her and the footage they capture feels genuine. Ashlyn, I think, didn't have enough presence on screen for me to think of her as more than a scared kid, but I can't really hold that against her considering her role was that of a scared kid. I had a blast watching Rorschach, although munching on cheese crunchies and watching it for the 10th time may have lowered my tension a bit. The grounded characters and happenings worked to make the footage all the more believable without sacrificing the sense of dread. If you like movies that deliberately goes too fantastic to be believed, offering violent vistas of chaos where reality becomes a distant memory, chances are this is not a movie for you. It's a subtle slow burn where nothing too outlandish happens for most of the time, and the long panning shots and still scenes can come across as boring. But if you're like me and watch too many Nuke's Top 5 videos and ever thought, I'd like to experience a real haunting sometime, this movie has you covered. Rorschach gathers 8 out of 11 high 8 tapes. If you want to check out Rorschach for yourself, it's available on YouTube on C.A. Smith's YouTube channel, link in the description. Thank you all for watching. I have been Cause Scratches. If you liked this video, please leave a like and subscribe and click that little bell. And I hope you see me again next time to yet again look at what I found.